when we think about what is sin, we need to realize we're actually talking about one of the big questions of life. So no matter who you are, you want to know why the world is the way it is. You want to know why we are the way we are. You want to know why bad things happen to people, why not even just why people do bad things to other people, but we want to know why the world is in such bad. Why are there famines? Why is there a tsunami that hit Japan in 2011? Why is there a coronavirus? So you have all of these real questions, and we want to know why it's happening. And the doctrine of sin answers that question. There's a whole like buffet of big questions out there in the world that everyone has to have some sort of answer for, whether they know it or not. One of them is like origins. How did we get here? What's our purpose in life? What's the meaning of life? Big questions. The other one is, why is there suffering and why is there evil? Which is what this question's here to answer. And then there's, how does everything end? What does the end look like? Is there hope that anything will ever be fixed? So big questions, and this is a big question. So this isn't, this isn't some ivory tower topic that we just talk about in a class. This is one of the big questions of life. Why do bad things happen? And why do we do some of those bad things? So that's why this is an important question. If we know what we think about this question, we have a real foothold. I mean, if we really know what we think about this question and we consider it in a bigger context, we have a foothold to understand our world and ourselves in such a deep and meaningful way. That's why I say this isn't just something from a book. This is real life. This is serious, serious stuff. And what we think about sin and what it is and what it isn't really is, it's sort of a controlling lever that impacts a million other things that are going on in the world. It impacts, I'll give you a few examples, like it impacts what you think about God. What you think about sin will shape what you think about God. If you think of God as like this smiling grandfather sort of guy who's up there in the sky, then you think of him as very forgiving, very indulgent. I mean, sin isn't very serious. It's not that big a thing because God's like the lovable grandfather who just always wants to forgive everybody. But if you think of God as pure and righteous and holy, then that means sin becomes something that's really serious with big consequences for who we are and for his relationship with us. What you think about sin impacts what you think about us as people, about you, about your spouse and your neighbor and unbelievers. What do we think about ourselves? If we think that sin is graded on a curve where, I remember a high school class where things were graded on a curve, and I really loved it because I got a really bad grade, but I still got a B because I did better than most other people. So the real score didn't matter. I was better compared to most of the other people. So if we think, sin is just something where we compare ourselves to one another and it's graded on a curve, then it's not a big deal. But if we view ourselves as people who are supposed to reflect God's image and we're held to his standard, then nothing's graded on a curve. And now sin becomes really serious because we have a standard that we can't meet. So we either have to meet it ourselves or someone's gonna have to meet it for us. Sin determines what shape we think we're in. Depending on how we define sin, if we think of sin as it's not that big of a deal, or that we're basically good people who make mistakes sometimes, then we don't really need a lot of supernatural intervention. We need a little help, maybe a push and some nudging and some assistance here and there, but we can pretty much reform ourselves with some help from God. But if we look at the Bible's view on sin and we say, I think God shows us that we're criminals who are in a lot of trouble, then we'll realize that we need a divine intervention. We can't, we don't just need a little help. We need a divine resurrection, a spiritual rebirth and resurrection, or else we're never going to be good. And I'll give you two more, and then I'll ask you what you guys think sin is. But what you think about sin also determines what you think the church is here for. What is our church here for? What are churches here for? If you think that sin, that we're all basically good people who need a little help, then a church's mission will be more about mercy ministries or caring or just showing love in a generic sort of way without any kind of, there's something wrong with you and God loves you and God has the answer to help you. Have any of you guys read In His Steps by Charles Sheldon? Has anyone but Andrew read it? Well, fine. In His Steps, fine. In His Steps, it's a classic, it's a classic book. It came out like 120 years ago, but the whole book is about this pastor who has this sort of, ministry revolution because he decides that he decides that the essence of his role as a pastor and the essence of the church and society is just to show love to people and to basically think, what would Jesus do if he were here? And so the entire book is how this pastor and this church started this sort of moral revolution in their town by just showing love to people. And it's really sweet in that respect because you see a lot of people showing love and being kind to one another, and then the town's getting reformed and so many great things are happening as everyone's being nice to one another and showing love to one another. But there's no gospel anywhere. It's just being nice to one another and showing love, which it's good to show love. But the pastor envisioned his role as being a light of love, like heart emojis everywhere. So picture a church building with heart emojis just exploding out everywhere. No gospel, just love, 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 love. And we just want to love on you. And that's it. So that's a really famous book about what was used to be called the social gospel, where instead of being about, you are in big trouble, you're in prison, you're in chains, you're alienated from God, but he loves you so much, he brought a way to save you and rescue you. The gospel is about how we can fix society by loving and caring for one another. And the real gospel is sort of, swept under the table and not mentioned very much. And the last thing I'll mention about why it matters what you think about sin is it's going to determine what you think about society. Will the world ever get better? Will the world ever get better if we can have more programs, show more love, do more things, have more after-school programs for kids, throw more funding at public schools, throw more funding at Boys and Girls Clubs and daycare centers and rehabilitation centers or organizations that teach skills to disadvantaged people. If we can just get enough money and people involved in these projects, can society ever reform itself and be better? Yes or no? And depending on what you think about sin in the human condition, if you think, we're basically good people, then you'll answer yes. But if you think our hearts are all completely messed up and none of it's ever going to change until people's hearts are changed by the gospel, then you'll have a whole different view of society, a whole different view of the church and what it's supposed to do in the world and what success looks like. And so it's sort of this seasoning, and depending on what you think that seasoning is, it's going to make everything taste completely different. If you get the wrong seasoning, the whole thing's ruined. And it doesn't matter how great all your other intentions are, it's ruined. The taste is what it is. So that's why this issue of what is sin is really important. It affects everything there is.